Well, today is day 28 of our 31 days in the book of Hebrews, and today we're going to finish out chapter 12. And after today, we're going to spend 3 more days in the final chapter of Hebrews, and then we'll be finished with this study. It's been a phenomenal study so far. Excuse me. But chapter 12 has been an incredible chapter. The beginning is all about the individual encouragement to run this race that is before us, to throw off everything that's weighing us down, to throw off the sin that's clinging to us, throw off the sin that's entangling us, tripping us up, and let us fix our eyes on Jesus. As we fix our eyes on him, we know that he endured so much hostility and so much wickedness, and because he did that, we should not grow weary or faint-hearted. But in this race, we are going to grow weary and faint-hearted at times as we experience hardship, as we experience discipline. But the writer showed us that we should see discipline as a blessing, because God disciplines those he loves, and because he disciplines us as a father disciplines a child. And then it moved on to the second section, which is more about the corporate encouragement, that we should strengthen one another. We should encourage one another to lift our drooping hands, to strengthen our weak knees, and make straight paths for our feet, to call one another to this race, to strive for peace, to strive for holiness, to make sure that no one falls away, that no one fails to obtain the grace, that no root of bitterness springs up and destroys the body, and that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau. And today, the section is all about our worship and how we approach God. He's going to use the example from the story of Exodus to show and compare and contrast how their worship was compared to how our worship is now and the promises of God. Starting in verse 18 to the end of the chapter. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words could not endure. Whose words made the hearers beg that no further message be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks of a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warned from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of all things that are shaken. That is, the things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So to back up to the story of Exodus, when the people of God were wandering through the desert and they're wandering through the wilderness, and the presence of God rested on Mount Sinai. The glory of God surrounded and filled that mountain. And the people heard the voice of God. They saw the mighty and the majesty and the wonders of God surrounding that, and they trembled in fear as it shook the earth, as it shook the mountain. And then in that, Moses went up that mountain. And he went up that mountain and he saw a glimpse of God, and he trembled with fear, and he came back down off the mountain. He was glowing, and the people were freaked out that he was glowing because he had spent time in the radiance of the glory of God. But they all trembled in fear to the point where they said, don't tell us anything else. Don't speak to us anymore. We cannot endure what you have said. We cannot endure this. And they were so afraid of the presence of God. And the writer uses that example to contrast where we are today. So, but you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, meaning not a specific mountain, but a place that we look forward to one day, that holy mountain of God, that holy presence, the dwelling place of God, eternity with him, where it's unshakable, where the Lord speaks, where the voice of the Lord can be heard, shaking the mountains, shaking the world. And we've come to them, to innumerable angels in the festal gatherings, to a heavenly assembly of the firstborn, all that great cloud of witnesses are surrounding this throne. They're all there, all the multitudes of the heavenly host. This is the imagery that we're talking about here. And in the middle of that, God, the judge of all, the spirits of the righteous who have been made perfect. But here's the difference between this moment and the moment in Exodus. There's something that wasn't there in Exodus that is here now. Into Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, into the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Now, what was missing between man and God is now present. There was no mediator between God and man. Now he is there, Jesus at the right hand of the throne of God, mediating on our behalf, cheering us on, showing his innumerable, unshakable love for us as he mediates to God for us. He's there. So we come to that throne not in fear, we come with gratitude. Look what it says here. See to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. Another example is showing us where we left off yesterday, Esau, who refused to believe, who refused to accept his inheritance as he traded away for something so minor, a bowl of soup. But it's been a common thing over and over again, showing us that we should not walk away, we should not drift away. But here he's showing us that we do not refuse him who is speaking. Why? For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, they did not escape. Much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. Showing us that the consequences for rejecting God are so much greater. At that time, his voice shook the earth, but now he's promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of all things that are shaken, that is, the things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken remain. At the end of all things, as God speaks, as he spoke everything into existence, there's going to come a day where God's going to speak, and all things will be shaken, all things will be removed, everything that has been created will be gone, and all things new will be given. And all things that are unshakable, meaning God and his eternal, everlasting kingdom. Everything other than that will be shaken. But the one thing that will remain is God and his everlasting, eternal, unshakable kingdom. It will always remain. With that promise, with that truth, look what it says in verse 28. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus, let us offer God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So, it said here earlier that he speaks a better word than Abel. If you remember the story of Cain and Abel, Abel provided the best sacrifice, the first fruits of the sacrifice. Meanwhile, while Cain offered a poor sacrifice to God that did not please God. And because of that, God did not accept it. And then we know the story that Cain killed his brother. Move down here where it says, therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Thus, let us offer God acceptable worship in the same manner. At the sight and at the thought and at the promise of God, we should offer to God a pleasing and better sacrifice, a better act of worship. We do not come to God in response to that with just nothing. We don't just come with an empty heart. We don't come with an empty spirit. We come to him with everything that we have. We come to him with all the blessings that we've been given, and we're giving them right back to God. Every breath that we have, we give back to God. We give back to him the first fruits of everything in our life, an acceptable act of worship. It really puts into a different perspective when you come to worship, doesn't it? When you come to worship, sometimes you think you're just singing songs. You're just singing a song that you like. You're singing songs that you don't like. You're singing hymns that you don't like. It's all about your preference. And you're not just even music, because worship is so much bigger than just music. Worship is about giving, and even when you're giving, I'm only going to give back a little bit. And you think, well, God only told me to give back 10%. God never put a cap on anything. You could give God back 100%. As long as your heart is in the right place. You know, it's the same thing as when you're reading God's word. You are worshiping God through his word. And whenever you just choose to skim through and you choose just to pick apart the different things that you like and not accept and being lost in the wonder, the fullness of this book, you're not really worshiping. Or whenever you live a life categorized by sin, you're not worshiping. But a life categorized by worship is a heart that's forever grateful, a heart that's forever fixated on Jesus, a heart that's forever focused in on him and pleasing him. Living a life characterized by faith, a faith that produces righteousness, a faith that does not shrink back, a faith that pleases God, as you saw back in chapter 11 and chapter 10. So it says there, Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. You have received, because of Jesus, you have received in God a kingdom that is unshakable. Everything in this world, you, me, everything will pass away. But the one thing that will remain is our Father in heaven and his unshakable kingdom. So let us be grateful and offer God acceptable worship with what? With reverence and awe. Yes, let us fear God for what he can do as we respect him, as we give him the highest honor, as we fear him and we offer him our reverence. But also in awe as we just see the majesty and the wonder and the glory of God as it fills the heavens, as it shakes the earth. Let's just be lost in that wonder. Let's be lost in amazement. I think about the song, I stand amazed in the presence. Just be lost in the amazement and the wonder of God and worship him. Verse 29, for our God is a consuming fire. And there's two ways you can look at that. One, fire consumes everything. And so fire will either, you can think about it as fire will either destroy you, or two, it will refine you. Our God is a consuming fire, so it will either destroy you and you'll be, if you ultimately reject God, if you don't give him pleasing worship, you will ultimately be destroyed with all the other things that are shakeable, all the other things that will be consumed. You ultimately will be consumed with it. Or as you offer a life pleasing to God, as you offer worship pleasing to God, as you offer faith that declares you righteous, as a faith that declares you righteous and that does not allow you to shrink back, that ultimately pleases God, as you live that life, as you live a life of worship, that fire will only refine you. As you walk through this life, as you journey through this life, being disciplined, as you're being refined, you're being made more and more into the image, as you're molded and created into the image of Jesus. But it's ultimately up to you. Will you live a life of worship? Or will you live a life of sin? Will you live a life of accepting Christ, or will you live a life of rejecting Christ? Our God is a consuming fire. His kingdom is unshakable. Let us approach him, not with fear and trembling, but let us approach him with gratitude and reverence and awe of what he's done and what he's promised he will do tomorrow and the days to come, and to the very end when we see him ultimately at the throne room of God.